A crowded room, a smug manager, and a calm black woman standing tall despite the insults hurled at her. The crowd murmured, some whispering in shock, as the truth about who she was turned the manager's sneer into a look of pure terror. This is a story of resilience and karma you won't forget. It was a typical Monday morning at Sterling's Luxury Emporium, a high-end boutique known for its extravagant merchandise and equally haughty staff. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and freshly polished leather, catering to the affluent clientele who shopped without glancing at price tags. The manager, Victor Langley, strutted around the showroom with the air of a self-appointed king. His tailored suit, slicked back hair, and sharp tongue commanded attention, whether you wanted it or not. Victor had a reputation for being picky about who deserved his attention. To him, a customer's worth was measured by their appearance. And that morning, his eyes fell on a woman who didn't fit his mold of worthy. She walked in quietly, her presence commanding without the need for words. Her chocolate-toned skin glowed against her crisp white blouse and tailored slacks. Despite her modest attire, there was an undeniable air of dignity about her. But to Victor, she was just another distraction. Someone he didn't believe belonged in his showroom. Victor's sneer was instantaneous as he walked over, his voice dripping with condescension. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you?" His words sounded polite, but his tone suggested anything but kindness. The woman, unbothered by his tone, smiled gracefully. "Yes, I'm looking for something special. Something elegant." Victor glanced at her from head to toe, as though assessing her ability to afford a single item in the store. "Our merchandise might be a little out of reach for some," he replied, gesturing dismissively to the racks of designer handbags. A few nearby employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the underlying insult. Unfazed, the woman maintained her composure. "I understand quality," she said calmly. "Show me your finest pieces." Victor let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "This isn't the kind of store where we browse for fun," he snapped. "We cater to serious buyers." A murmur swept through the showroom. Customers and employees were now paying attention to the unfolding scene. The woman stood her ground, her eyes locking with Victor's in a way that made even the most confident man feel unsettled. "Do you always treat potential customers like this?" she asked, her voice firm but unraised. Victor scoffed, crossing his arms. "We treat people as they present themselves." The room seemed to freeze. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional click of a cash register. But before Victor could continue, a young employee named Ellie stepped forward hesitantly. She was a recent hire, new to the boutique's rigid culture. Sir," she whispered. "Maybe we should—" Victor raised his hand sharply, silencing her. "Ellie, don't get involved. Go organize something." The woman, still calm, turned to Ellie and smiled warmly. "Thank you, dear. I appreciate your kindness." This small gesture of humanity struck Ellie, who stepped back, conflicted between her manager's orders and her instinct to intervene. The other employees remained silent, unwilling to risk Victor's wrath. Victor leaned closer to the woman, lowering his voice but not his hostility. "If you can't afford to shop here, ma'am, I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." The woman's smile didn't waver. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. Opening it slowly, she revealed a platinum card that gleamed under the boutique's bright lights. The room collectively inhaled as the card's prestigious insignia became visible. Victor's smirk faltered, but his arrogance refused to waver completely. "Anyone can carry a card," he muttered, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "I'd like to see that handbag," the woman said, pointing to the most expensive item in the store, a limited edition designer bag that cost more than most people's annual salary. Victor hesitated, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. With no choice, he gestured for an employee to retrieve the bag. His demeanor, however, remained cold. It's quite an investment, he said, his condescension still lingering. As the employee handed her the bag, the woman examined it with a practiced eye. Her poise and confidence left no doubt that she was accustomed to luxury. But before she could proceed, Victor's final attempt to assert his dominance slipped out. "Are you sure this isn't too extravagant for someone like you?" The woman's expression didn't change, but her tone turned icy. "I'll decide what's appropriate for me. Thank you." The tension in the room was palpable. Victor's arrogance was beginning to crack, but his ego wouldn't let him back down completely. He watched, his jaw tightening, as the woman turned her attention to the bag, considering her next move. Little did Victor know, this was only the beginning of his lesson, a lesson in humility and the power of quiet resilience. As the tension simmered in the boutique, the subtle buzz of activity grew louder. Customers whispered among themselves, their curious eyes darting between the poised woman and the visibly rattled Victor. It wasn't every day that someone dared to challenge the self-proclaimed king of the showroom. The woman, still holding the luxurious handbag, turned slightly toward Ellie, the young employee. "Could you please bring me a matching wallet to this bag? I'd like to see how they pair." Ellie hesitated, glancing nervously at Victor. He gave her a sharp nod, his jaw clenched. Relieved for the momentary reprieve, Ellie quickly retrieved the wallet and handed it to the woman. "Thank you, dear," the woman said warmly, making sure to smile at Ellie, whose face flushed with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. Victor, unable to keep silent any longer, stepped forward. "Let's not waste too much of the staff's time, ma'am. This isn't a museum." The woman turned back to Victor, her eyes steady and calm. "You seem quite eager to dismiss me," she said. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that silenced the murmurs in the room. "Why is that?" Victor blinked, caught off guard by the question. He opened his mouth to respond but stopped when an elderly couple near the display racks cleared their throats audibly. Clearly they weren't impressed by his behavior either. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit entered the boutique just then, his presence commanding immediate attention. His salt and pepper hair and sharp features exuded authority, and a few employees straightened their postures upon seeing him. It was Mr. Sterling, the owner of the boutique chain, and he rarely made public appearances. Victor's confidence flickered for a moment, but quickly returned. After all, he was the store manager, trusted to oversee this branch. He walked briskly toward Mr. Sterling, eager to showcase his authority. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. We're just handling a minor situation with a customer." Mr. Sterling didn't respond. His eyes scanned the room before landing on the woman holding the handbag. Recognition dawned on his face, and his brows furrowed. He strode past Victor without a word, heading straight for her. "Ms. Daniels," Mr. Sterling greeted warmly, extending his hand. "It's an honor to see you here." The room froze. Victor's expression twisted in confusion and shock. The murmurs from the crowd turned into a low hum of disbelief. Who was she? The woman, now revealed as Ms. Daniels, accepted Mr. Sterling's handshake with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I've been meaning to visit this location for some time. I must say, it's been an enlightening experience." Victor's face turned pale. The calm, composed woman he had insulted mere moments ago was apparently someone of great importance, someone who knew the owner personally. Mr. Sterling turned to Victor, his gaze sharp. "What exactly has been happening here?" Victor stammered, his usual smooth confidence evaporating. I was just assisting Ms. Daniels, ensuring she found what she needed." "Is that so?" Ms. Daniels interjected, her voice calm but cutting. "I must admit, the assistance was rather lacking. In fact, I've rarely been spoken to with such blatant disrespect." The crowd now stared openly, their earlier whispers replaced by stunned silence. Ellie, standing near the register, watched the scene unfold with a mix of awe and apprehension. Mr. Sterling's jaw tightened as he turned back to Victor. Care to explain what she means by that? Victor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, he finally managed. I was simply trying to— Ms. Daniels raised a hand, silencing him. Please, Mr. Sterling, let's not dwell on the past. I'd like to move forward. Her words, though gracious, were laced with an unspoken warning. The crowd sensed it, and so did Victor, whose composure crumbled further. Mr. Sterling nodded. Of course, Ms. Daniels. How can we make this right? Ms. Daniels smiled, her gaze flickering toward Victor briefly before returning to Mr. Sterling. I'll let you know shortly. For now, I'd like to finalize my purchase. Victor blinked, his mind racing. Purchase? After everything, she was still planning to buy something? The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air as Ms. Daniels turned to Ellie. Could you assist me with this, dear? I think I'd prefer working with you. Ellie's eyes widened in surprise, but quickly nodded, stepping forward to help. The two women moved toward the counter, leaving Victor to stew in his humiliation. As the tension in the boutique reached a boiling point, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that his nightmare was far from over. Ellie nervously fumbled with the register as Ms. Daniels placed the handbag and matching wallet on the counter. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. She could feel Victor's burning glare from across the boutique, but the presence of Mr. Sterling nearby gave her a newfound courage. As Ellie scanned the items, Ms. Daniels leaned in slightly and whispered, "Thank you, dear. You've been nothing but professional through all of this." Ellie's face flushed with gratitude, and she managed a small smile. "I'm so sorry about—" she started, but Ms. Daniels held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "No need to apologize for someone else's behavior," she said firmly, her words carrying a quiet strength. "You've done nothing wrong." Meanwhile, Victor stood stiffly near the entrance, his mind racing. His earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by the cold realization that he had made a grave mistake. Who exactly was Ms. Daniels, and why was Mr. Sterling treating her with such reverence? As if on cue, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Ms. Daniels, if you don't mind me asking, what brings you to this particular location today? I would have been happy to meet you at our flagship store downtown." Ms. Daniels smiled graciously, but with a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Oh, I like to keep things spontaneous," she replied. "Besides, I wanted to see how things were being run here, away from the spotlight." Her words hung in the air like a veiled accusation, and Mr. Sterling's expression tightened. He turned to Victor, who had paled considerably. "Victor," he said sharply, "is there something I should be aware of?" Victor swallowed hard. "Sir, Before he could finish, Ms. Daniels spoke up. "Let me answer that for him." Her calm demeanor took on an edge, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I've never been one to let rudeness or prejudice go unchecked, Mr. Sterling. Let's just say I've experienced both today." The crowd, which had been quietly observing, began to murmur again. Victor shifted uncomfortably, his mind scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. "I deeply regret if there was any misunderstanding," he began, but Ms. Daniels raised a hand, silencing him with an authority that felt almost regal. "No misunderstandings here," she said. "Your words were loud and clear." Ellie, still standing at the register, watched the exchange with wide eyes. It was rare to see anyone stand up to Victor, and even rarer to see him at a loss for words. Mr. Sterling, sensing the gravity of the situation, turned back to Ms. Daniels. "I assure you, this is not how we conduct business," he said, his tone firm. "This behavior is unacceptable, and it will be addressed immediately." Ms. Daniels tilted her head slightly, studying Mr. Sterling. "I appreciate your words, Mr. Sterling, but I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for accountability." Victor flinched at the word, and the murmurs from the crowd grew louder. It was clear that whatever happened next would leave a lasting impression. Just then, a young man in a tailored suit entered the boutique, carrying a leather portfolio. He walked straight to Ms. Daniels and handed her a folder without a word. She opened it, scanned the contents briefly, and then looked up at Mr. Sterling. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, handing him the folder. Mr. Sterling opened it, his eyes widening as he read. The color drained from Victor's face as he watched his boss's reaction. "This," Mr. Sterling began, his voice shaky. "This is a transfer of ownership." Ms. Daniels nodded, her smile now one of quiet triumph. "As of this morning, I'm the majority stakeholder in your company." The room erupted in gasps. Victor's legs felt like they might give out beneath him. The woman he had insulted and dismissed was now his ultimate boss. The boutique was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The weight of Ms. Daniels' revelation hung heavy in the room. Victor's face flushed an angry red, but his words failed him. His usual bluster and arrogance were stripped away, leaving only a man caught in the web of his own prejudice. Mr. Sterling, ever the professional, recovered quickly. "Ms. Daniels," he said, his voice steady but laced with respect, "I cannot apologize enough for what you've endured today. This is not how we represent ourselves, and I take full responsibility for allowing such behavior to go unchecked." Ms. Daniels raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Apologies are easy, Mr. Sterling. Change is harder." Victor, sensing the shift in power, finally found his voice. I didn't know who you were," he stammered, his tone a mix of fear and desperation. "If I had known—" "Stop," Ms. Daniels interrupted, her voice sharp and commanding. She stepped closer to Victor, her presence towering despite her shorter stature. "What you mean to say is that you didn't think I mattered. You saw me, judged me, and decided I wasn't worth your respect. That's the truth, isn't it?" Victor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked to Mr. Sterling for help, but the older man's icy glare offered none. "You see," Ms. Daniels continued, addressing the room now, "people like Victor are why I invested in this company. Too often the values of inclusivity and respect are just words on a mission statement. It's time to ensure those words mean something." The employees and customers who had been quietly observing broke into a soft murmur. Many nodded in agreement, emboldened by Ms. Daniels' words. Ellie, standing by the register, felt a surge of pride. This moment felt bigger than just a confrontation. It felt like justice. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Victor," he said, his tone cold and formal, "effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. I will not tolerate such behavior under Ms. Daniels' ownership, or mine." Victor's face turned ashen. "You're firing me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Ms. Daniels interjected. "I am." Her voice carried a finality that left no room for argument. "You don't represent the values this company now stands for, and there's no place for you here." The murmurs grew louder, some clapping softly in support. Victor stormed out of the boutique, his shoulders hunched and his face a mask of humiliation. The tension in the room seemed to lift with his departure. Ms. Daniels turned to the remaining employees. "This isn't just about today," she said. "It's about creating a culture where everyone, customers and staff alike, feels respected and valued, and I'm counting on all of you to help make that happen." Ellie, emboldened, stepped forward. "Ms. Daniels," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means." Ms. Daniels smiled warmly. "I think I do," she replied. "And thank you for standing your ground today." It didn't go unnoticed. The days following Victor's dramatic exit marked the beginning of a new chapter for the boutique. Under Miss Daniels' ownership, the store underwent a transformation, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The first change was a staff meeting led by Ms. Daniels herself. She stood before the team, her commanding presence radiating warmth and determination. "This boutique isn't just a place where people shop," she began. "It's a place where everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, feels welcome. That starts with us." She introduced new training programs focused on diversity, inclusion, and customer service. Employees were encouraged to share their ideas and concerns without fear of judgment. For the first time, the team felt empowered, knowing their voices mattered. Ellie became one of the most vocal advocates for change. Inspired by Ms. Daniels's leadership, she stepped into a mentorship role, helping newer employees navigate the boutique's evolving culture. Her confidence grew, and with it, her ability to stand up for herself and others. The boutique's clientele began to reflect its new values. Word spread about the store's transformation, and people from all walks of life started visiting, drawn by the promise of respect and quality. Customers often left glowing reviews, praising the welcoming atmosphere and excellent service. One day, a familiar face walked into the boutique. It was Mrs. Simmons, a longtime customer who had witnessed the confrontation between Victor and Ms. Daniels. She approached the counter where Ellie was working and smiled warmly. "I just wanted to say," Mrs. Simmons began, "this place feels so different now. It's refreshing to shop somewhere that truly values people." Ellie beamed. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. That means a lot." As Mrs. Simmons browsed the new collections, Ms. Daniels emerged from her office. Spotting the woman, she walked over to greet her personally. "I've been meaning to thank you for your kind words that day," Ms. Daniels said. "Your support reminded me why this work is so important." Mrs. Simmons laughed softly. "The truth is, you reminded me of something too, that it's never too late to stand up for what's right." Meanwhile, Victor's dismissal had become the talk of the town. Initially, he wallowed in bitterness, blaming everyone but himself for his downfall. But as time passed, he began to reflect on his actions. Seeing the boutique flourish under Ms. Daniels' leadership forced him to confront the truth. His prejudice had cost him not just his job, but his dignity. Months later, he reached out to Ms. Daniels with a handwritten letter. In it, he apologized for his behavior and admitted that he had much to learn. Ms. Daniels, ever gracious, read the letter and chose to forgive him, though she knew forgiveness didn't erase the past. Ms. Daniels' journey became a beacon of hope for others. Her story was shared on social media, inspiring countless individuals to stand up against prejudice and fight for what they believed in. She was invited to speak at conferences and schools, where she shared her message of resilience and leadership. In every speech, she emphasized the importance of courage. "It's not about proving people wrong," she would say. "It's about proving yourself right, about knowing your worth and never letting anyone take that away from you." Years later, the boutique stood as a testament to the power of change. Its walls, once silent witnesses to discrimination, now echoed with laughter, collaboration, and stories of triumph. Ms. Daniels continued to lead with grace, ensuring the boutique remained a safe haven for all. Ellie, now a manager, often reflected on that pivotal day when Ms. Daniels walked into the store. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, strength and integrity could transform not just a business, but an entire community. As for Ms. Daniels, she often thought back to her mother's words, which had guided her through the darkest moments. "Never dim your light for anyone." And she never did.